So we show this angle. We show the angle that, okay, this mental consciousness is now reborn. It's now leaves the body at the time of death of life A, and it's reborn somewhere not as a result of the second link of karma, because of a different karma, accumulated at a different time, part of a different 12 links. Okay? So we're not mentioning that here. Why? Because we're trying to show what happens to this particular karma, even if you're reborn as a result of a third karma, a different, totally different karma. Does that make sense? Okay? So, this is a little bit complicated. So, first I accumulated, let's say, the karma I described as the second link is the karma to be reborn as a dog. Okay? I accumulated, it's me. I accumulated the karma to be reborn as a dog in life A. And now I'm reborn as a human as a result of a different karma. The dog karma is still with me. I could, of course, purify it if I would do that. But I'm not interested in purification. I'm too busy. So, I'm reborn with this karma as a dog, to be potentially reborn as a dog. I carry this over into life B. It could be destroyed if I wasn't reborn. Then, if I wasn't reborn, I wouldn't carry that seed with me. But I am. I am, and so therefore the causal consciousness, link number 3, which can be divided actually in causal and resultant consciousness. This is the only link you divide into 2. Causal is at the time previous life. Now I'm this human. This is when I was conceived, at the moment of death from my previous life, there was an intermediate state, never mind, we ignore that, we don't need to look at that. And then my mental consciousness entered the fertilized egg of my mother. So the resultant consciousness was the consciousness that left my previous rebirth and was conceived. That's the resultant consciousness. Resultant from the perspective of the dog karma. Only clarification. I don't take any questions, only clarifications. Yes.
So actually, life C is also a new A of the...
Yes. Yes.
Some of the links, in some way, life C is also A for life out.
Yes. So I'm reborn as a human. So I have another life A that accumulated the cause to be reborn as a human. Right? So that was... I'm not looking at it from that perspective, because I'm not interested. It's almost like, when you're in a production line, you produce all these different things, and you zoom into on one product, and you want to follow it. How does it go from here all the way to the store? Okay? It's a bit like that. So of all the karmas we accumulate, we zoom in onto one. And at the same time, of course, we are reborn again because of a different karma. But that's not what we're interested in. We're not zooming into that. So, I'm reborn as a human, but I don't care about this human imprint, because I'm focusing on the dog imprint. Okay. Now, my egg is conceived into the... Does that answer your question? Yeah. So, my egg is... my mental consciousness is conceived in my mother's womb. Okay, so the human rebirth, okay? So I'm reborn as a human in that womb. So that is the resultant consciousness, resultant from the perspective of holding the imprints of the dog, just from that perspective, of the dog karma. It's resultant with respect to that. That is now reborn into a physical body. So first the resultant consciousness is just saying it's reborn. Once it's found its body, okay, then you have a psychophysical complex, to use a modern word. You have now a complex where mind and body are interlinked. Because of a different karma before, now the two have come together. Okay? This is important because for the dog karma to be ever any danger of ripening, for the danger, you need to have a mind and body. If hypothetically, after I accumulated the dog karma, I would have gone out of existence, as in like I I reached nirvana, the dog karma would never bother me. It'll just disappear. But because I was reborn as an ordinary human being with still my afflictions, everything, this keeps on going. This karma, the dog karma is safe in the mind. It is safe. So this is what this is stressing, that if you're reborn, the dog karma is reborn in another samsaric rebirth, all your samsaric seeds, all the other ones are safe. Of course, it's not good news for us, but saying this is how we carry on these seeds. So we've zoomed in on one particular one, the dog karma. Now you are your resultant consciousness, the one that left the previous birth, the previous life, is now reborn into a psychophysical complex, which is called Namarupa. It's the Sanskrit word for it, or Mingsug in Tibetan, or name and form in English. It's really weird, name, form. Nama, it's Namo, right? Nama, yeah. Nama as in like name, but it means actually much more. It refers to the mind. It refers to the mental aggregates. Because who you are, right? Who you are is determined by your mind. So name here in this sense is like whatever name, whatever kind of, this is what His Holiness once explained. So whatever I call you to be, whatever I say you are this, that, and the other, give you a certain name, mainly depends on your mental consciousness. And then there's form. So what determines who you are in terms of your psychological makeup, that is determined by nama, and then there's the form, rupa. Okay, so it's just another way of saying your mental consciousness has entered now a body, now you've become this structure, name and form. That is psychophysical complex. Okay. But this psychophysical complex, in order for this karmic seed, so for this karmic seed, the dog seed, to be in any way effective, at some point, you need a body, you need a samsaric body, that we have now. That one we have now. But you also need afflictions, you need afflictive emotions. Just having a body, just having a mind, so now you have a samsaric mind. As I said before, if you hadn't been reborn again, you wouldn't have a samsaric mind. But you wouldn't have a samsaric rebirth. But now you have your own samsara in the form of this. If now you had no afflictions, again the karma wouldn't harm you. If now you became an Arya, it wouldn't harm you. If now you would become an Arhat, if now you would attain nirvana, again the karmic seed couldn't harm you. But in order for us to harm us, in order for us to ripen, we need afflictions now to affect this. We need afflictive emotions to affect this, which is why the next links are explained. How, as ordinary humans, do afflictive emotions arise? Well, in dependence on our sense perception. As ordinary people, okay, when you meet the Dharma, your attachment, your anger, all that goes over into the Dharma. But as ordinary beings, it's our sense gratification. That's what we seek out. And that then gives rise to craving, to grasping, etc. And that's what we need. Because the karma in itself, just having the karma, is not sufficient. We also need for it to ripen. For it to ripen, we need afflictive emotions. Now, therefore, the next process describes how this takes place. So, just having a body and mind is not sufficient. As an ordinary beings, we need the senses. Okay? So, therefore, the next link, first you had the resultant consciousness, which is part of 3, entering a samsara, name and form, psychophysical complex. That's link number 4. And now you need the senses. So link number 5 is the senses start to grow in the womb. Sense sources. Sense sources, they describe sense sources because they say first they have to grow. First they have to come into existence before they can start to work. So that process is described. Sorry, it's been waiting to come out. So,
the dog karma
The sneeze come. Well, anyway, so then the sense sources, they come into existence. So it's showing that not just having a body and a mind, in order for afflictions to arise, you need the senses. As an ordinary being, that's how your afflictions arise. So there's link number 5 saying the sense sources now, or the senses come now into existence, the sense sources. So it happens in the womb, basically. Body sense you have all the time, but then the eye sense, the ear sense, they basically rise in the womb. I don't know, I guess the eye sense is last. It's the last thing you perceive is the visual forms, etc. So before that you hear, you taste, you smell. Anyway, scientists could tell you exactly how this happens. So that's link number 5, the sense sources. Okay, so first they just grow and they have the potential now to perceive objects, these sense consciousness, all 6 of them together. So the period of when they grow is the sense sources. Mental consciousness is always there. The mental consciousness is there the whole time. But there's not much to attach to. There's not much to get angry with because you're basically in that limbo state. You haven't encountered anything yet. I mean, you may, of course, already have certain physical you experience heat and cold, but all 6 of them are not fully functioning yet. So that period while they're growing is number 5. It's just telling us there's this process while they're growing. And then all 6 are ready. When is that moment when all 6 are ready? The next link, contact. Now all 6 sense consciousnesses, all 5 sense consciousnesses, they are able to make contact with objects. They can make contact. That's link number 5. Can make contact with objects. So, which means sense power, fully functioning, object out there, previous moment of awareness, those 3 coming together, okay? A moment of awareness, an object, and the sense powers. When they arise at the same time, then a moment later you can have an eye consciousness or an ear consciousness. So all 6 can now, mental consciousness plus the 5, they can now arise. That is contact. Okay? Now, of course, contact will give rise to feeling. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every time there's a feeling. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every time. Okay. Now that gives rise, depending on the feeling, to craving. If it's a virtuous feeling, if it's a pleasant feeling, we crave it. You cannot help it. There'll be a subtle form of craving or a strong form. We may think, oh no, I don't crave things all the time. Oh, you do. You grow attached to the weirdest things. To the weirdest things. The more you become aware of your own mind, the more you become aware of the subtler forms of craving. Not like, hummus, kill for it. No, that's a coarse form. That's easily recognizable. But there's subtler forms in each moment, right? In each moment, when it's pleasant, your mind right away hooks onto it. When it's unpleasant, there's the craving to be free from it, right? Strong, pleasant, or not just strong. Pleasant, crave. Unpleasant, don't want it, craving to be separated from it. So pleasant, craving to have it. Unpleasant, craving to be free from it. Neutral, well, usually it says we also crave for those. Neutral is better than unpleasant, so we even crave for those. Okay? And sometimes we even crave the unpleasant one in a bizarre way, right? Like, I'm a sick person, I want, this is me. We kind of grow even attached to that. Is the microphone an issue? Yeah, I know it makes these... It's okay? Yeah. Sometimes the distance, I try to keep it in the right distance. Okay, all right. So, can you still follow me? All right. So that is then the next link of contact. Okay. Now just to remind you, live number B, resultant consciousness, which is the second part of link 3, enters psychophysical complex, link 4. Link 5, the sense powers grow. Once they're ready, link 6, now contact can be made. all six consciousnesses, right? Fully ready, fully capable as we are now. And then craving, of course, all the time. Craving becomes stronger, gives rise to grasping. Okay. Now, okay, not a big deal. And this is our life. Life B. Craving, grasping, craving, grasping. Basically, it's a short version, but just that angle, that our life is controlled by craving, grasping. Of course, there's misapprehension, and we accumulate new karma, but we're not looking at that angle, remember? We leave that aside. Just looking at the fact that there's craving, there's grasping, there's craving, there's grasping. And then we die in life number 2, life B. We're near death. And craving, grasping, of course, all the time there. But now, just before death, our craving is really strong. Especially when we feel death is approaching. It may be like over days, like you're lying there to die, and you want to exist. There is this underlying, it may not even be conscious, but the wish to exist. Because you feel mind and body are separating. And that sense is like a sense of extinction. Or like, I don't know, when you're in a situation like a car comes towards you and you know a moment later it's going to hit you. And it's like, no, I want to live, right? Or whatever. Like, unfortunately, we don't remember. Well, we may remember. We may have had near-death experiences. And definitely the sense, oh no, no way. So craving to exist. We want to exist. We want to continue like this. This is the power of our mind. We want to go on like that. So first it's just craving. Want to exist. Craving for the self. Craving. So there are 4 types of grasping explained here. But those are just in general. But at the time of death, this is when the karma, we need to go back to the dog karma. This is when this becomes relevant now. And now, depending on the craving and grasping, and the fact that our life comes to an end. Now, we wish to continue to exist. That's why the dog karma can now ripen. Because we want to continue, we grasp. It's us wishing to continue on. And as I'll explain in a moment, or when we get here, also the thought at the moment of death, other than the craving and grasping, that is also responsible. That is also plays also a part. So, therefore, the ignorance during life A, which was responsible for the seed. Now that seed, because of the craving and grasping, it starts to grow. It's like you add water to it now. Previously, it was just a seed, like a dry seed, as in like, this is the analogy they give. Don't think of it as a seed. It's not like a little seed in your mental consciousness. That would be ridiculous because your mental consciousness is non-physical. But just use it like the analogy of a seed. It's like a seed. But you need water. Water is the craving and grasping. The craving and grasping was only possible because you had the sense sources. It was only possible because you had a mind and body. It was only possible because of the resultant consciousness. All those were part of this. They're responsible for craving and grasping, because if you hadn't been reborn again into samsara, you wouldn't have craving and grasping. And then even having been reborn, if you didn't generate craving and grasping in dependence on the senses, the sense objects, again, you wouldn't find yourself here in the situation at the moment of death, with now the craving and grasping serving as water. And the warmth that you need for the seed is this last thought, maybe virtuous or non-virtuous, at the moment of death. Not only do we have craving and grasping, but we die with a peaceful mind or an unpeaceful mind. We may generate strong hatred in that moment, directed at the driver who's kind of coming towards us, or love and compassion at the driver coming towards us. So, the point is that you have craving and grasping, that's like the water. Then you have a thought, that's like the warmth. And now the dog seed is actualized. It starts to get actualized, to get activated. Previously it wasn't activated. Clarification?
I don't know, it's a question of clarification, because as far as this logic goes, there are many
Why just the dogs? Yeah, why just the dogs? Yes, why just the dogs? So why in certain situations, give me an example, in certain other situations, only one seed of like many flowers, you plant many seeds, only one grows. Give me another example where only one situation can take place. Many could take place, but only one takes place. Another example in everyday life. Yeah.
When you have your white canvas and you choose to start painting.
You have a white canvas and you paint one painting. You could paint millions, but you paint that one. Well, in that moment, just one basically gets through. We can deal with this more, but only one ripens in that moment because you want to exist. Once one has ripened, nothing else needs to ripen because you have the wish to exist. One existence is only possible, so one will ripen because of the thought that accompanies you while you die. Okay, and that then, therefore, leads now to the full ripening of the seed. Once that is fully ripened, you can't stop it. The seed now, that is described as existence. It's called, some call it becoming, but really it means much more existence, like samsaric existence, basically. Now and it's giving the name of the result to the cause. You're not yet existing in a rebirth as a dog, but everything is ready. You cannot stop that process. Now, this karma to be reborn as a dog cannot be purified. Up to that moment, you could have potentially purified it, but in that moment, it's fully ripened. You cannot stop it. Okay, so it's like this karma is ripened now. You're still in that. You're still not dead. That is, your mental consciousness has not yet left the body, but you're ready to move on. It's already, your dog is kind of ahead, basically. And so this is the link of existence, which is link number 10. And then you're reborn, 11. And then, since you're reborn, the moment you're reborn, you start aging and eventually die. So, rebirth is 11. Aging and death is 12. Okay? As a dog. Reborn as a dog. You see? It's just a different angle. Of course, all the other ones happen too. When you're reborn, you have again name and form. Right? Name and form from a different cycle. All this is still true. It's just looking at a certain angle. But there's the importance of looking at it from a different angle. Because, as I said, what I think is most difficult for us to understand is life B. And also just not life B, the end. The end is very obvious. Craving and grasping lead to the actualization of the seed. But why do you need name and form and the sense bases and contact? Why do you need that? Well, as I said before, that dog seed, if you didn't have any of that, the dog seed couldn't harm you. You need to, again, have a body in the next life. And a body with sense bases that gives you the access to objects that you consider pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and then craving. And craving and grasping keeps that seed, gets that to ripen. Okay? If you get rid of craving and grasping, you can be reborn as a dog or as a worm or anything, thousands of times. You won't. Because like a seed without warmth and water won't germinate. Okay? So our karmic imprints, they're like seeds that germinate when the right causes and conditions come together. And that is craving and grasping. So actually, we are reborn as a result of wanting to be reborn. We want to continue in samsara. We don't know anything greater. This is why in Buddhism, you try to replace your ordinary craving for existence with renunciation. Renunciation is very misunderstood because of the word. We shouldn't call it renunciation. Renunciation is not giving up. It's not about giving up. It's about wanting to reach nirvana. So you replace your wish for samsara, right? We want to exist. We want to exist within samsara. You replace it with the wish to reach nirvana, right? By, of course, wanting to overcome our limited kind of understanding, basically, our limited existence of Even our happiness is just a form of suffering. That is the understanding that you have. So you understand that this is very limited, so you want something greater. If you want something greater, then that becomes the cause of nirvana and not samsara. Right now we just wish for samsara. And that's where we're in. So that's the power of the mind. We are at where we exactly want to be. We're exactly where we want to be. We want to be in samsara. We are craving samsara. And that sometimes, of course, has unwanted consequences. We don't crave to be a dog. But that is because of the negative karma, the negative action we've accumulated, plus the fact we want to stay in samsara. It's a very deep craving. It's a subconscious craving. So don't you think, oh, when I die, I'm not going to crave it. At some point you can't stop it. It'll arise naturally because it's subconscious. That's why Buddhist practice takes a long time to go onto that, to reach that subconscious level where you want to be liberated or you want to become a Buddha. So you replace, that's bodhicitta. So renunciation is the wish to reach nirvana. Bodhicitta is the wish to become a Buddha. So instead of wishing for the ordinary that we get as a result of that, you wish for something greater. So the reason we exist is because we wish to exist in a certain place. So it's always those wishing kinds of minds. Craving is a wishing kind of mind, but it's an extreme mind. It's a mind that is not based on reality. Renunciation is, bodhicitta is. It can work based on a misapprehension of reality, but it can also work based on a correct apprehension of reality. Okay? So, therefore, renunciation, this is why entering the Hinayana path, entering the Mahayana path, always comes along with a wishing mind that counteracts this other ordinary wishing mind to exist in samsara. Okay, this is just at the side. But to give you a sense that, yes, we wish to be in samsara, that's why we're still in it. Okay? And those 12 links, as just described, shows you that process. Does that kind of make sense, the 12 links in a short version? Does that make sense? Pardon? Very much. Good. You can, but I still want to just take... please, because I'm going through them now. I'll go through them now. And then definitely questions. But maybe I'll answer these questions anyway that you may have on the way. So allow me to address those at the end. Now, hopefully it makes sense. So obscured. We are obscured by ignorance. Verse number 1. We perform 3 types, actions of body, speech and mind, of compositional actions, formative actions. Here in particular, actions that give rise to a new rebirth, very powerful virtues or unvirtuous actions that lead to rebirth, here it says. Driven by formative karmic actions, we wander in migratory existence. So it's those karmic actions, those karmas, the different forms that we have accumulated in the past and continue to accumulate, they are responsible for our existence in like migratory existence, as in like continuing continue to migrate from one life to the next. Like we wander around from here to there.
Actions which are not karmic?
Sorry?
Karmic actions. Are there actions which are not karmic?
Yes, there are actions. Yes, we'll deal with it later. So, in general, here we speak specifically of volitional karmic actions that are responsible for rebirth. So her question is, are there non-karmic actions? We'll deal with them later. But here we specifically talk about just them. All right. Then, number 2. So the first two links are described in verse number 1. Ignorance and compositional actions. So verse number 1, ignorance, compositional actions. Okay, link 1 and 2. Life A, link 1 and 2. Then, verse 2, it describes consciousness, and then those two, consciousness, causal consciousness, resultant consciousness, and then name and form. All right. So those link number 3 and 4 are described in verse 2. Having actions as its conditions, as its causes or its conditions. Consciousness, okay, so that's not mentioned explicitly, but the imprints karmic imprints have been left on consciousness in life A, and that consciousness now enters into a migratory existence, life B, okay, into a human existence. It now enters. Once consciousness has entered, name and form will come to be. So once consciousness from the previous life has left the name and form of the previous life, has left the body, now it's entered into the next existence as a human. It's me as a human. So I have this name, psychophysical complex. It's only a short link. It's only short. It's in the womb, basically. So once name and form come to be, now the 6 sense sources arise. Right? Link number 5. 6 sense sources, they arise. And then dependence on those, once they're fully ready, contact. Wow, now we can enjoy sights and sounds and everything, right? Okay, contact ensues. All right, now 4 is a little bit difficult. It's kind of does this, it doesn't go straight forward on. It says how contact arises. It just describes this process of contact. Okay. Where it basically says, previously, consciousness in itself gave rise to a psychophysical complex. So consciousness, link number 3, gave rise to an entity we call person, consisting of mind and body, of something physical and something non-physical. Here, what Nagarjuna says, that you can also have something physical and something mental giving rise to a mind. Do you see that process? So, link number 3, consciousness. Okay, don't look at the verse right now, just look at me. Link number 3, consciousness. When it enters a new rebirth, it gives rise to something physical and mental. Right? A psychophysical. So without the mind entering the fertilized egg, the egg would die off. Okay? The only reason the egg can continue to thrive and grow into a living being is because consciousness has entered. Okay? That's the Buddhist explanation. So if the fertilized egg, if no consciousness enters, then the karma of that person cannot be responsible for the process of growth. Therefore, consciousness needs to enter. Which means that consciousness is responsible for a resultant form, physical entity, and a mind. The mind now of a human. In case of life B is my life. So it's human, yeah. So in the same way, you can also have something physical and a mind giving rise to a consciousness. So consciousness can give rise to something physical and a mind. Consciousness can give rise to name and form. Likewise, you can have something physical and consciousness give rise to another consciousness. Well, in the case of contact, for instance, for having eye consciousness. For me to have an eye consciousness, I have so before my eye consciousness perceiving the cup arises, I need consciousness already, and I need a cup. I need a cup, a consciousness, and actually also the physical basis, the physical sense powers. So I need form, physical sense power, and the cup, and I need consciousness to give rise to an eye consciousness perceiving the cup. So in the same way as consciousness can give rise to mind and something physical, a psychophysical complex of a person, it can also go the other way around. Something physical, such as my sense powers and this cup, can also give rise to a consciousness. So it's just saying that there's this constant interaction. Consciousness gives rise to something physical and mental, and something physical and mental can give rise again to consciousness. So this is what it says here. It is solely, verse number 4, it means contact. Contact is solely generated depending on eye sense power, form, the cup, and retention, mental consciousness. Retention, here they use the word for it's a little bit, this is where the translation is difficult. It's the Tibetan word, and I don't know in Sanskrit, but it's the Tibetan word temba. Temba means to remember, means to recollect, means to think. So the Tibetan word for mindfulness, for instance, temba, means to think, to remember, and to be mindful. It has all three meanings. So depending on the context, it's used in a specific way. Boaz, what is the word in Sanskrit? Is it also remembrance or recollection? Yes. Okay. Yeah, retention, mindfulness. So because in Tibetan, they could have used another word. They could have used the word consciousness. They could have used the word awareness, but they didn't. They used the word, which they're equivalent in that moment, but they still use the word retention. So, as in like remembrance. And it makes sense. We perceive something because we have already a sense of what things are, remembering from our sense of reality. So if you see an eye consciousness to make contact, there is already some kind of sense of something. So even if you're reborn, a little baby, you bring things from the past with you that enable you to continue on to recognize things, etc. So therefore, retention is an appropriate word. But anyway, it's kind of really just saying, because of an eye sense power, because of an object, and because of consciousness, now those two come together, you can have contact. So thus, in dependence on name and form, consciousness is generated.
Consciousness is generated verse 4 is not the same consciousness
No.
of line 3 of verse 2.
No, absolutely not. We're just saying that, yes, consciousness from a previous life gives rise to physical form and name, that is another mind, in this lifetime. Okay, so previous life, let's say in my previous life I was a frog. In my previous life I accumulated the karma to be a dog, but I was a frog. In this lifetime, this frog consciousness leaves the frog as a resultant consciousness holding the dog karma. It is reborn in this lifetime as a human. So, therefore, this resultant consciousness carrying the seed of a dog rebirth, that is the consciousness, gives rise to name and form. Name means the mind of a human, form means the body of a human. So in that sense, name and form. But in a totally different situation now, once I'm this human, then my sense power, which are form, the cup, for instance, which is form, plus a moment of awareness, which is name, they give now rise, the totally different ones, give now rise to an eye consciousness. So it's like just describing that in different situations, sometimes consciousness causes name and form, sometimes name and form, that is consciousness and form, cause other consciousnesses. That's all he's saying here. Going back to interdependence or going back to reciprocal relationships. Reciprocal relationships? What does reciprocal mean in Hebrew? Okay. Did you hear? Okay. Mutual, yeah, mutual, reciprocal, yeah. Yes? Mm-hmm. It's generated. Mm-hmm. Ah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. This is where the different, the Sanskrit and the Tibetan are really, really close, but every now and then there's a slightly different word. So this is why I'm curious about the difference between them.
Verse number 2 said how consciousness actually comes.
Comes to be, yes.
Here it's actually talking how consciousness actually goes on.
Okay.
Goes on, it's proceeding, it's behaving, independence on energy form, dependence on I, form, attention, intention.
Okay, all right.
Can it mean develop? Behaving, can it mean also develop?
Something about the decisions, the way it's going on.
Yeah, in Tibetan, in verse 2, it says, this is one, so consciousness has entered, name and form will come to be. That's what it basically says in Tibetan. But then in verse 4, it says consciousness is created. It comes into being. But okay, so here in Sanskrit, well, the thing is sometimes the Sanskrit, this is one of the difficulties. I've had this discussion with an Indian Sanskrit scholar that I told you about him, Raj. He also says that there's sometimes the difficulty where a word in a particular region could also have an extra meaning. So this we just don't know. In general, it would be this is how consciousness behaves, right? So maybe either it's just a mistake, just a good old mistake, but it's kind of a little obvious. So I find it hard to think that the person just thought, oh, it's maybe that's what the meaning is. But still, it could be a mistake. It could also be that the translators at the time, they always worked together with an Indian master. Maybe that was the explanation they gave in that moment. But I don't know, why not say behave? I mean, it would be much nicer. This is how consciousness is generated. Consciousness behaves in that way. But anyway, for you it's not important. For you it's just to get a fuller sense. Yeah. Mm. 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 Yes. So it's important. Yes. Right. Okay, great. So it just gives you a fuller sense to think of it, be aware, this is what consciousness does.
And maybe also moment to moment.
Uh-huh.
And maybe also because it's a process of development.
Right, that's true. It's a process of development. Yeah, that's, yeah.
So it's like you have consciousness, but then it's a kind of reciprocal force because it develops. So it will, like, it's manifested, but then there's this energy that is kind of similar or reciprocal. So it will manifest again, but in a more developed or in a different.
Well, it's kind of like saying that consciousness gives rise to physical objects, but physical objects again give rise to consciousness. So it's this constant back and forth and exchange in that way.
It's all energy in either kind of.
Well, energy, no. Energy is physical. Energy is physical. Consciousness is not energy. Energy is just a word. Energy is physical. So energy gives rise to consciousness, and consciousness gives rise to energy, yes. But consciousness comes along with an energy, but it's not energy, right? But other than that, I would totally agree. That's like, yes, it's this back and forth interdependence.
I have mental disturbance with this consciousness issues.
Okay, but this, unfortunately, wait until you have the mental disturbance with the selflessness business. That's easier. But leave it for now. Sorry, I need to interrupt you here. For the question and answer time, we can get into this more. But just think of consciousness as like the experiencer, as experiencing something for the time being. Because we can't, if we start talking about consciousness now, we won't be able to continue. But I'll still want to address that at some point. Okay, great. Now just the verse number 4 is a little bit difficult in terms of if you not understand. But then 5 goes on with contact, feeling. Just going back to, if you remember what we discussed, that which is coming together of the 3. Now, in the case of an eye consciousness, it's just an example. So you have an eye sense power, you have a physical object, and then a previous moment of consciousness, so you have an eye consciousness. Or you can take sound, ear sense power, you have an ear consciousness. So the point is here, going back to the fact that once I carry this dog imprint, now I'm a human, now I want that craving and grasping to arise. What is the safest way for this to arise? The sense consciousnesses, craving, sight, sounds, etc. And that's just saying, first, in the womb, there's just the sense basis, but then it's ready, contact, and my life goes on. It's all about, and that's an ordinary life. It's about beautiful sights, sounds, taste. That's the whole life is about that, really, isn't it? I mean, relationships, we may think, no, my life is much more, it's more about relationships. But relationships, it's about, there's sensual pleasure, the relationship of hearing nice words, being understood, right? It's all, our lives, we're in this, what's called the desire realm. We're in a particular form of existence, and there are different forms of existence, but the most common one is ours, and our life is governed by desire, right? This is why shopping malls are so successful. It's all about desire. So, sense perceptions. Therefore, it's the coming together, and we have to talk more about this, like phenomena don't exist in and of themselves. Where's the pleasure? Right? It seems like the pleasure is in the object. Of course, that's where the illusion comes in. That's where the misapprehension comes in. But just simply speaking, this is what our mind meets object, and then we go. Attachment, etc. arise. Okay, great. So that is the coming together of these different aspects. Contact. Contact gives rise to feeling. Every time you perceive something, there's a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or neither, neutral. Again, become aware of that every time. And that is what's responsible, our feeling, which is why we talk about it as one of the aggregates. Our feelings ordinarily govern our actions. Our feelings govern our action. It's big. You feel good, you want more. You feel bad, you want to be separated from it. And of course, our misapprehension lies at the root, but on a coarser level, just that feeling, so important. We want to feel good. We want to have this. We want to be separated from that. And so attachment and anger arise as a result of certain feelings, directly. Okay, now, so contact, feeling comes to be. Craving, then verse 6, craving is conditioned by feeling. Craving arises for a feeling. Craving gives rise to a feeling, and craving arises for a feeling. Okay? Feeling gives rise for craving because we crave a feeling. Okay? So feeling, then there's craving because we want it. I want more of it. Okay? So it's not like we can just experience it and let it go. This is our problem. We experience it and go, oh nice, what's next? No. I want to keep it. Okay? All right, and then we start acting accordingly. So craving arises for a feeling. When we crave, we grasp. Not at all times, but most of the time it grows stronger. We grasp. And there are 4 types of grasping. We grasp at the 4 aspects here. 4 types. Well, one is called grasping out of desire. We grasp out of desire. That is our good old attachment to sense objects, the most common one. Good old grasping at sights, sounds, etc. But then there's also grasping at views. We grasp at certain views. It's like this, it's like that. That takes it to a slightly different level. So grasping at that which is impermanent, we perceive it to be permanent. That which is in the nature of suffering, we perceive it to be in the nature of happiness. We'll talk more about this in 18, but just take it for now. So therefore, these different misapprehensions, except the view on the self, that is not part of the grasping at views, because it comes as the 4th point. So you have grasping out of desire, grasping at views, grasping at mistaken morality and conduct. This is also mentioned here because as an ordinary person, it's sense perceptions. Then if you're a little bit more sophisticated, like if you study and have certain... as an ordinary person, there's grasping at senses and grasping at views. Okay? But then You could be a religious person. As a religious person, so in the past, most people in the world followed some kind of spiritual system. So we were grasping also at mistaken morality and conduct. That's another one that's very interesting. How, nowadays, grasping, for instance, at thinking, I don't know, I blow myself up, I go to heaven. I don't want to discriminate against any religion. All religions have those, to a certain degree. So, for instance, in Christianity, kind of like mortification of the flesh. It depends on how you practice it, but it's like, I'll get closer to God if I whip myself. If that's I don't know whether that's always the reason for doing so, but good old mortification of the flesh, I did some research on it. So it's really like you just hit yourself in order to get closer to God. In the sense that you feel, if you whip yourself, you can't feel your attachment, and if you can't feel your attachment, you feel closer to God. It's like if you whip your attachment out of yourself. So priests in the past, they would whip themselves when they felt strong desire or attachment, craving, and then like just, if you feel all that pain, you can't feel it. It's an interesting idea. A recognition of the negative emotions and then whipping them out kind of idea. In other traditions, another person has to behave in a certain way so you can control your desire. Right? Okay, I don't want to criticize any religion, but a woman has to cover herself. Well, it's also in Judaism, women have to cover themselves. Also in Islam, women have to cover themselves. Also in Christianity, in the past, women had to wear a scarf to, hide. Like when you see the Pope, a lot of women still wear a veil. So the woman has to be veiled if she steps in front of the Pope. Okay. In Buddhism, I guess maybe you could say like if shaving off a head, if monks would just want to be around women who have shaved heads because they're not attractive, there you go. That's an extreme way of looking at it. Okay. But going into other areas, also like in some of the religions where animal sacrifice is seen as a spiritual practice. Okay, so you kill all these animals. Terrible. So that would be animal sacrifice. Then you have, for instance, what else? In some of the Hindu traditions, also the idea, if you undergo a lot of hardships, then you are able to reduce your afflictive emotions, right? Your self-cherishing. If you are like undergoing all these hardships, like when you run a marathon, right? There's not much self-cherishing. You're so exhausted. It kind of goes to the back of your mind. So a lot of systems, like they existed before Buddhism, for instance, or even afterwards, like standing in the sun, like the 5 fires. Like you have burned 4 fires around you, and the 5th is the sun. And so due to that, this incredible heat, you're so exhausted, you're so kind of like overwhelmed by the hardship, the self-cherishing and so forth cannot arise. So it was a recognition of those minds, but then undergoing certain hardships and believing that to be spiritual practice. So the Buddha himself underwent these ascetic practices as a means to kill the self-cherishing, basically. Okay, now these are not religious. They don't help in the end. So our grasping at those as being helpful when actually they harm others, in the case of sacrificing animals, killing animals, or in the case of, I don't know, committing suicide and killing others in that way, or the Christian, what do you call these wars that they fought in order to... Crusades, yeah. So the Crusades, for instance. And in Buddhism too. In Buddhism you find that too. Wrong practice, not practicing properly. There's like a saying amongst the nuns, we sometimes say, oh, he's a monk, he thinks if he hates women, he's a better monk. It's like when they have... Some monks, it doesn't happen that... if it's a good practitioner, the best practitioners I met were all the greatest feminists. They were really they felt totally comfortable with women. They had a sense they're equal. I remember one of my teachers who actually, after he had passed away, he stayed in the clear light for a few days. No one knew this. No one expected that. He was just a good old monk. And then when he died, he was like, wow, he stayed in the clear light for about 5 days. But he was everyone felt he was just ordinary. That's the thing of it. a lot of the greatest practitioners, you don't really respect them. You think they're just ordinary. They don't want to be respected. They come across as like really humble, like almost like friars a little bit. And then they die and you go, oops. I mean, like, they want to be seen as friars. Actually, they have because they have so much self-confidence, they don't care what other people think about them. So they do kind of silly things sometimes, because then people look down on them and their ego, it's so many monks are like that. I mean, I've met another monk too, who was just so ordinary, and when he died, he was in the clear light. I was like, I always looked down on him a little bit. I thought like he didn't know anything, and there he was. He died, and anyway, so this one teacher of mine, he was also like, he didn't care about other thought, and he treated me just like the monks. It was amazing. It was so, like, he would say, you sit in the front. You're a foreigner, you may not hear as well, you sit in the front. I usually never sat in the front, not like right in the front. And my other teachers wouldn't put me there. But this particular one, he didn't care. So I could always tell to some degree when there was no sense of like, oh, men, women, that he was totally equal. There's no, when he talked to me, it was, yeah. Anyway, the point is here, of course, if it's not a practitioner, then you have certain views. I've come across monks who are also like, women, and they treat women slightly differently. So again, you think it's your religious practice, you're thinking, I'm very moral, I'm leaving these nuns at the... But it's actually grasping at not like a mistaken morality and conduct. I mean, this is just one example, and I don't want to go into the women's issues that much. There are other issues too. Believing yourself to be a good practitioner, in my case too. I mean, I've done thousands of things when I'm thinking, ooh, I'm a good practitioner, I'm really good, right? And actually, I'm in the back of my mind, the 8 worldly dharmas are at play. So I want to be seen as, I want to have fame, I want to have good reputation, pleasure, and gain. Okay? So these are all examples of grasping at mistaken morality and conduct, although those are not usually cited. Usually the coarser ones are cited. Okay. And then number 4, grasping at the self. So those are the 4 types of grasping. Grasping out of desire, so at sense objects, grasping at wrong views, view of permanence, etc., grasping at mistaken morality and conduct, and grasping at the self. Those are the 4 aspects Nagarjuna mentions here. So I think we can all recognize them to some degree or another in ourselves. Then, when there's grasping at the time of death, so now we need to fast forward. So birth, in the womb, and then grasping our entire life, grasping from morning to evening, break. Oh. Oh yes, okay. Sorry. So we'll continue after the break. We'll have 15 minutes. Will that be enough? No? 20 minutes? From experience, 20 minutes were realistic. Yeah, so let's take 20 minutes. I'll finish this when we have a meditation. Okay, great. Yeah.